And our next session is titled Smart Power, New Measures of Hard and Soft Power in the Zone. This session will discuss the movement of power and influence to re-emerging Asian economies and the changing nature of power and influence. This session is going to be moderated by Mr. Bernard Salt, columnist for The Australian, who himself has written extensively on this issue in his capacity as social commentator.
Aiko, for that introduction. Thank you also to the University of Western Australia for the invitation to speak. Bernard Salt, I am a columnist with the Australian newspaper. I am also a partner with KPMG. So KPMG think I work for them full-time, and the Australian newspaper think I work for them full-time as well. Today we are speaking about the rise of smart power. You've heard of soft power, you've heard of hard power. The latest concept is smart power. And I'm going to ask you all to ferret through your gift, your handout packages, to see if you can find this booklet. If not, that's fine. Pick it up, certainly on your way out. This is an encapsulation, if you like, of the concept of smart power. Its author is Eleanor Douglas, a PhD candidate student at the University of WA Business School, also the founding CEO of the Advance Australia Group from a decade ago, which managed the interest or coordinated the interests of 1 million Australians who live offshore. She also has an academic role within the university. What I want to do is talk about smart power, the rise of smart power, and I want to begin by asking Eleanor to talk about the concept of smart power and also why she assembled this booklet. So, Eleanor, welcome.
Thanks, Bernard. So obviously the smart power concept's not at all mine. It's Joseph Nye's working on his, building on his work around soft power, and then when that was critiqued that hard power is so critical, he talked about the need for statecraft to be broad and to deal with both the dimensions, the traditional dimensions of power, prosperity and military projection, but also all of the very difficult to quantify cultural norms, values, the diasporas around the world, the networks, the connections. So what we've sought to do here...
Could I just put shorthand, an Australian shorthand term for this might be the vibe.
Yes.
I don't know whether you can translate that to our visit, but a very Australian term. So
yes, yeah. The vibe, that's right, the vibe, and how attractive a culture is seen to be by other people in the world. So why we did this report is it's in the sort of in the zone reframing tradition. So in the zone came up with some stunning facts in the first instance about the 60% in the time zone, and that helps reorient perceptions. So what we tried to do here is we're sort of concerned to hear all the time in Australian dialogue, Asia, Asia this, Asia that, as if Asia's this monolithic thing, rather than the phenomenally diverse and rich and complex and different place that it is. So this was just to look at the zone and to look at, to do two things, to look at all the countries individually, but also to run the soft power and hard power ruler over things. And so we've looked at prosperity, persuasion, which is that vibe, culture, norms, networks, and we haven't, and then projection.
Projection of military power. Very good. Well, I wanted to, I must say, when I first saw this booklet just earlier today, as someone who writes about, deals with demographics and hopefully converts that into readable data, this is an extraordinary publication, and I'm going to nick a lot of the information here and use it for my own purposes. What I want to do is to talk through some of the data charts and see whether in fact that changes your view of the issues. And perhaps if we start on page 5, for those who are following this, gross domestic product. Eleanor, fairly straightforward, but what does this tell us about, about the zone?
The first thing it tells us is that it's big. So the zone, this region is 23 trillion, and it's 1/3 of the globe's economic activity. So we've strung together all of the economies in the zone, and China, from China at 8 billion to Laos, 8 trillion, to Laos at 9 billion.
Just coming back to that, the Chinese economy, therefore, is $8,000 billion in US terms.
Yeah.
The American economy is $15,000 billion in US terms. So the Chinese economy in US dollars is half the American economy. The report released about 2 days ago saying on purchase price parity, they're about equal. But in US dollars, it's 50%. From my memory, at the beginning of the 20th century, China was at about 33%. In 1990, it was about 10% of the American economy. And the issue is, when will those trajectories change in US dollars? The 2020s, I suppose. The Australian economy there at around about 1,500 billion. So it's around about a quarter.
And I should mention, we took the decision to not make this Australia compared to that, not all about Australia. This we've designed to be usable by any policymaker in any country, and it's neutral in its analysis. It's not always looking for Australia's role. But we have added the piquant touch of Western Australia wherever we can get the data.
Very good. I'm going to come back to that. Always pitch to the local audience. I love the data on page 7 as well, looking at population, of course. China at 1.3 billion, India at 1.2 billion or whatever. What is your observation here with the big picture demographics of the zone?
So our first observation was that we really wish we'd done a projection for 2050 as well, because in some ways that story is even more interesting. So China at 1.3 billion will probably is expected to have by 2050 only in Australia worth only 25 million more people. India, on the other hand, is expected to have an additional 400 billion. So India goes from 1.2 billion to 1.6 billion. So how's that? And Indonesia, another 50 billion. So Indonesia is now at 248 million, but Indonesia will be a country of 300 million by 2050.
There's a couple of other observations I would make. The total population is of interest, of course, but I think the most important issue in Australia and beyond is the rate of growth in the productive population, 15 to 64-year-olds. 15 to 64-year-olds buy consumer goods, they take out loans, they reproduce, and they pay tax. So which countries have the capacity to grow their tax base most over the next 20 years? And of these countries, I would say countries like India, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand. The consumer base, the tax base, should grow. The other observation from this data, I think, is the Japanese participation rate is 59%. The Indian participation rate is 56%. In China, it's 71%. In Australia, 65%. Is there scope for cultural revolution here in higher levels of female participation? What do you think of that?
Certainly Japan has a lower female participation rate than several of the other economies.
But it would be extraordinarily confronting to Japanese culture to actually shift to that degree.
But perhaps the bigger issue for Japan is the ageing of the population, as well as in my list of additions to population, Japan by 2050 is expected to have a whole Australia less people.
Which is why they need to increase their tax base through higher levels of participation.
Yes.
So,
high levels of participation among an ageing and declining population.
see,
Tricky
this
move.
is the value of the demographic perspective of the world, you see.
Today people have been saying geography is destiny.
It's
Demography.
geography and demography. Moving on to page 9.
Oh, actually, one other point on this page is the services revolution. So we know that the Chinese economy, that policymakers in China are actively trying to shift their economic focus away from the emphasis on manufacturing and construction and towards services and domestic-led growth in services. And so that is and as well as the rise of the middle class across the region. So this is a good ready reckoner for people to have a look at to see where the average GDP per capita is across the zone.
Every conference I go to like this, everyone talks about we need a term, we need to invent a trendy term to define the process of the middle classisation of China. I don't know what that term is, but you can't write middle classisation. I submit that to editors and they strike it out. But in fact, that is what we're talking about here. Not only do we need a term to define the process of middle classisation, we need to understand what the parameters are. What is the income per capita in purchase price parity or US dollars? Because every report from McKinsey's to KPMG to whatever
number.
has a different measure. We need to determine when the middle class starts and finishes, or some sort of better measure, so we can actually get a handle on this, I would have thought. The next one I particularly like was page 9 on trade, and the level of foreign investment. Is that the one in foreign investment in Australia?
No, sorry, this was the one on
That's right.
page 9 was trade.
Page 9 was trade. Then, of course, on page 10 is foreign investment, and foreign investment in Australia, $56 billion. Foreign investment in China, 256 or thereabouts $billion. To put it into any other observations?
Well, the one that struck me the most was India. So India, 1 billion people, but only $24 billion of investment. And you'll also see on the next page, business climate, that India is ranked lowly in ease of doing business and economic freedom. So these two marry up.
So with India, you've got rising productive population and the capacity for another level of foreign investment. What might be the triggers, the hurdles, if you like, to prevent that? Is it governance issues, administration issues, political issues?
According to the indexes on economic freedom and ease of doing business, the weakness is the responsiveness of the legal system to protect contract. So it takes so long to get things through the courts that people don't have effective contract other than sort of family protections.
Attitude. It's coming back to the vibe.
Institutions,
the vibe.
Yeah.
We might move through to the next chart I particularly liked. Very creative, this issue of data graphics, and not really so much emphasising words, but it's up to you to interpret from these data sets what you can. Page number 16, I thought global diplomatic footprint. So your impact at a global level, in a diplomacy level. Eleanor.
Interesting that sort of Cold War warriors still having the highest, China and Russia having the highest number of missions. How we've measured the diplomatic footprint in the number of official missions that a country has overseas. And
so just to clarify, Russia has 252 diplomatic missions. I think there's only 195 countries in the world, so they must be doubling up somewhere.
And China, 241.
241.
And the Lowy Institute often speak about Australia with 167 and as not investing as much as we ought in that.
Right, so we should be opening more offices. I'm sure that will go down well with this audience. Then foreign aid on the opposite page, page number 17. Australia, around about $5 billion a year in foreign aid. How does that stack against other countries in the zone?
Well, the big player in aid is Japan, and if you can see the diagram, it's got the biggest footprint in aid. Now, per capita, Japan gives less than Australia, but it's still a dominant global player in giving aid at 10 billion. And then the countries Indonesia, India, Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, those countries all give less than, Indonesia gives 10 million, India 5 million, Philippines 3, and the other countries nothing.
But what struck me about this was, in actual fact, Australia with an economy around about a third or a quarter the size of Japan.
A quarter the size
of Japan delivers aid half the size of Japan. So what I'm saying is we're quite generous in this area.
It's relative.
By this measure, I suppose.
Yeah. Can we go back to just to flag to people that the regional architecture one?
This is on page 14.
We're not going to go into it here, but I just want to
explain the concept.
The concept is just that that Australia, the countries of the zone, we've just taken the countries of the zone and looked at the economic and security alliances, the economic alliances and the security alliances. So those that are both and those that are one or the other, and illustrated those through for each country. So you get a sense of which, and we also have ranked the number of alliances that each country is in. So the biggest number of alliances is Malaysia at 24 and the smallest is Mongolia with 5. But this is, I guess, we haven't been able to do networks and connections and diasporas and things like that this time, but this is the formal government-to-government infrastructure, diplomatic infrastructure that exists in the region or that participants in the region are in. So that's to look at later.
So on this measure, Malaysia is friends with as many people as possible.
That's right.
In the broader
They've
region.
got the most connections.
Yes. Okay. The other one that I thought was interesting, or this one is very complicated, but again I think it provides a quite unique and left field perspective on this issue of smart power.
We're on page 20.
We're on page 20, and I call it the spiders diagram. Eleanor, you're going to have to explain the concept here and what the key findings are.
Well, this one's one to look at home later when you can concentrate. But what we tried to do is that vibe thing. So we tried to construct, and we'll keep working on this and take advice on how to do it better. But our aim is to get a map for each country of its desirability. So we looked at the attractive things about a country, and those we were able to measure in actual hard terms. So things that occur like people come and study, people vote with their feet. So the vote with their feet measures study, migrate, visit for tourism, and then a livability index, which we've used as a proxy, the creativity index. So they're the 4 positive, attractive things. And then on the negative side, we looked at homicides as a measure of violence. We looked
per
at
100,000.
Per 100,000. We looked at enslavement, child marriage and human trafficking under the category of slavery. So that's the existence of that in a country is an unattractive thing, and with the big global slavery movements particularly being headquartered out of Perth at the moment.
Where did you get that data?
Amnesty International, the Freedom,
Right.
Transparent, Death Penalty Worldwide, and the Global Slavery Index.
Okay,
yeah.
right.
So violence, slavery, and capital punishment, and corruption. Those were the 4 negatives. So we ranked all the countries in the zone by each of those dimensions, and then mapped their performance, if you like. And that's the picture that we're drawing. But that one you need to sort of sit with it for a moment. Yeah.
And are there any big picture observations you can make about which ways countries are trending, or is that up to the individual to interpret that? It's a bit like an ink block test.
A bit like an ink block test. Most countries still have a weakness on the 4. So most countries have one area that sort of stands out. Australia is a very attractive destination for study and migration and tourism and creativity. So we do very well on that measure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I think we're on the next page. Again, I particularly like this one, elite sport and film, moving towards cultural power, if you like. And I suppose this is the point about new ways of measuring impact and performance. It's not military impact, it's not GDP output, it's cultural power, I suppose. You've been quite creative here. You've measured Olympic gold medals and movie production. Tell us about this chart, Ellen.
Well, just the Chinese dominance in sport and the Russian dominance in sport. So 38 gold medals for China, 24 for Russia, 10 of course for Australia, where we know we punch above our weight. But the most interesting kind of contrast is India, 0 gold medals for sport, but of course then on the other hand has Bollywood, so is the world's greatest producer of movies.
I was saying before that I think it was at the Olympics before last, I was in New Zealand when Australia was winning all these these gold medals, and the New Zealanders' view of Australians' capacity to win so many gold medals was, well, that's because you invest in the Australian Institute of Sport. You buy your gold medals. And it's quite, you know, it was a fair comment, I thought, at that time. We're rich enough to actually invest in the institution, I suppose. And then in movies, again...
Bollywood is by far the biggest producer of movies in the world, India.
Very good. And then if you go down the chart to, you put Western Australia there, are there really no gold medalists from Western Australia? They're all coming from Victoria, I'm sure.
It's a good critique. It's a good critique. We could actually have gone and looked at the 10 Australian gold medals and seen which state the people came from.
We're all one Commonwealth. We're all one happy family here.
Yeah. Could we just do military innovation?
Okay, and then the final one in the book is hard power, military might, and I suppose this is the traditional way in which, like a CIA fact book might measure military power. So, Eleanor, tell us about military might in the broader region.
Well, it's sort of what people would have expected to see, that China has the largest expenditure in the region on military might, and by far the largest number of active military personnel. So
one measure I would have liked to have seen here is the number of aircraft carriers. And the reason we had one, but we crashed it. I think Britain has one, France has one, I think Russia has one, China now has one, America has 10.
We should definitely have done that.
And that is how you project global military force, in my view. So I think that would have been as the cold hard measure of hard power.
The average military expenditure in the zone is 1.8% of GDP, so quite similar to Australia's expenditure. China has nearly 3 million servicemen and women, so that's something that's a pretty impressive fact, and $166 billion spent a year on the military.
Right, okay, that's in US dollars, 166.
US.
And how does that compare with the American budget? Is around about 600, I think. So it'd be about a third, not quite, maybe a quarter of the American budget. Were there other ones that you wanted to talk about?
Well, the Indian spend is growing fast.
Right, okay.
Over the last few years, it's been growing fast.
I suppose my question is, this is an extraordinary effort, collecting data from all sorts of left field sources to put it in a way that has technical veracity, trustworthiness, if you like, and then to compare it on a range of quite left field formats, and then exceptionally well presented, I thought. What do you see as what are the major observations that you've drawn from all of this effort?
How much data is available? It's amazing. You go to the World Bank website and, you know, half the questions you want to ask you can answer in 5 minutes. So it's amazing how much data is out there. But then it's amazing, like on the language one, which we didn't go into, just how little data there is on some things and how hard it is to get good comparisons. So there's sort of a sea of data, and then often the very thing you want you can't find. The other thing is how on the innovation one, I found it interesting to see when you can see the links between a country's expenditure and its outcomes. So in innovation, South Korea spends 4%, and I know my Vice-Chancellor will be happy to hear this said from the podium, that 4% of South Korea's GDP is spent on R&D, and they get a far higher number of patents per capita as a consequence, but still the Chinese... another fact that was really stunning was how China dominates the patent applications in the zone. So China has 652,000 patent applications a year, and that dwarfs anyone else. So that I guess any spirit of complacency, there's no place for complacency about our children's future, because we might not be putting in place at the moment all the things we need to in order to remain competitive. We've perhaps had an easy inheritance.
Up to now.
An easy inheritance, yeah.
I suppose when I look at this, the big picture, I often feel with data, I mean, I deal with it every day, and what I find is that everyone will say, here's wonderful sources of information. There is a step beyond that, and I call it editorial courage. Here is a sea of information, beautifully presented, innovatively presented, creatively presented. What is the important issues? The editorial courage is to say, this is what this is saying. When I look at this, I see something like, well, the rise of China, the rise of India. The next step would actually, beyond economic power, beyond military power, is then soft cultural power, if you like. That's how I would expect to see the influences play out over the next 10, 15 years or so. And I want to conclude, I know we're almost out of time, asking with Elena, we've had hard power, we've got soft power, we've now got smart power. What lies beyond? What other shades of power are there out there that maybe we should be considering? Have you thought of what lies beyond smart power? Because I've got a couple of ideas.
Oh, good,
Bernard. I'll let you just collect your thoughts. Cultural power, or is that simply another term by cheating there?
You're cheating.
I'm cheating there, okay. Emotional power.
Yeah, EQ.
Emotional power.
Yeah.
So I can tell, EQ. Emotional power, blood.
Empathy.
Empathy. Empathy. There is an emotional connection between Australia and the UK, a blood link, if you like. With stronger levels of immigration of Chinese and Indians into Australia, will there be an emotional
Cricket.
power? Cricket, I suppose. Actually,
It's
very
called-
good.
it's called
cricket
cricket.
power. And then I started to get really quite spiritual power. Belief systems, I suppose, might be another basis upon which you would get inter-country connectivity. Any thoughts while I was giving you?
No, I think, and it's, the Foreign Minister described herself as a relationship manager. It's really the capacity. So there's things that are attractive, but then can you sustain the attraction? So how do you maintain connections and relationships? And trade is actually a brilliant way of maintaining connections and relationships and connectivity. But, culture and strengthening all the other ways of doing it.
Look, I think it's a fantastic document, brilliantly executed. I always go to look at the source, see the technical veracity of this. It's been put together by an economics PhD student.
No, it's a team
So
of
I
clever
have
people.
confidence in the figures. And I think that it opens a different level of discussion. We're seeing shades of power, of influence, and it takes your mind in different directions. What I think we should be doing is involving a discussion or creating a discussion. What is the editorially courageous views that should be projected into a conference like this as a consequence? So I'd like to congratulate the university for the production of this, and hopefully it'll be funded next year as well. So thank you.